At number 10 is the infamous Gold Balls, aka Egg. Mentioned a handful of times already on this channel, Gold Balls is one of the more bizarre mutants to be given as much panel time as he has. Part of the new generation of mutants, Fabio Medina can summon golden balls on command, which don't actually have any destructive or useful properties whatsoever, at least on their own. Although it is soon discovered that when combined with the powers of 4 other mutants, Gold Balls is able to create a force field of immortality that can resurrect fallen mutants and protect others from death on the island of Krakoa. So there is, after all, a pretty impressive use for Fabio's abilities, but only when paired with the powers of 4 other mutants. On his own, he just squeezes onto this list.
Number 9, Mr. Fantastic. This might be a massive hot take, but hey, you know, I'm going for it. You can come for me in the comments if you want to, that's fine. Well, I think Mr. Fantastic as a character is pretty cool, and his brilliance definitely cannot be denied. His power set has to be one of the worst amongst the people on his team. Am I right or am I right? I mean, Johnny Storm is the Human Torch who can fly around and literally engulf himself in flames. How cool is that? Ben Grimm is the Thing, who is tough and strong enough to face off against the Hulk, and Susan Storm Richards is Invisible Woman, the real powerhouse of the team who can turn invisible and create force fields big or small enough to defend against or defeat almost any opponent. Now, what does Mr. Fantastic have? He can stretch. Really good? It's really more useful in specific circumstances, so that's why he's making my cut.
At number 8 is Rainbow Girl. Hailing from the DC universe, Rainbow Girl has the ability to use the colors of the rainbow to take on any human emotion she desires on command. Red represents anger, blue, hope, and green, willpower, and they all make up a pretty bad superhero, if we're being honest. Online, this character is even viewed as a symbol of an older time when male writers were a lot more simplistic and offensive with their portrayals of female characters. And if these emotion-driven powers based on the colors of the rainbow don't hit that home, her pheromone shield should be a hint that this is true, since that power is used to make her the most popular girl around.
Number 7, El Guapo. El Guapo hails from the strange mutant team known as Ecstatics. However, like most who have joined that team, he did not last too long. He died less than 10 issues after his first appearance and introduction. Poor El Guapo. El Guapo is Robbie Rodriguez, and his powers allow him to control a skateboard, but not all skateboards, just one skateboard. One that he happens to form a symbiotic connection with. But even that couldn't really save him, and he ended up dying, actually impaled by his own skateboard. It's rough sometimes. That's the Ecstatics way.
At number 6 is Color Kid. This superhero has powers just as his name suggests, and not much more. He has the ability to change the color of anything on command. Part of the legion of substitute heroes and the assistant to a scientist on his home planet, Color Kid always seems to be in the shadow of greatness. And unfortunately, his powers don't help this cause very much either. Being able to change the color of anything isn't really such a useful power and often proves to disappoint his teammates, especially in combat situations.
Number 5, Penance. Penance was once the hero known as Speedball, who is now back to being Speedball again actually, thank goodness. His real name is Robert Baldwin. Baldwin decided to change up his superhero appearance and name following the instigating event that led to the first Civil War. In the comics, this was actually similar to, but different from the MCU and the Sokovia Accords. Similar in the sense that many people did die, many of them, in the case of the comics, civilians. Different in the sense that it wasn't a tragedy at a political gathering, but rather happened as a result of the New Warriors pursuing supervillains in the interest of their reality TV show, which, you know, would later become political because one of the team members, Nitro, went off and kind of killed a bunch of civilians and the rest of his teammates in the process, with Speedball being one of the few people to actually survive that incident. As a result, it was said that his powers had changed due to his guilt, and they could only be activated when he experienced physical pain. This caused Robert Baldwin to change his name and his appearance, being known as Penance, in honor of all the lives lost that he felt responsible for, and wearing an Iron Maiden inspired supersuit covered in spikes, as many spikes I believe as there were casualties, so that he could trigger his powers as needed.
At number 4 is the one and only, the infamous Bailey Hoskins, with the power to self-destruct. destruct. This is one of the more tragic superheroes who ends up losing his life after only 4 issues when he finally uses his power. We can assume that this character should land on a list like this every time, considering the comic book series that he's featured in is literally titled X-Men Worst X-Man Ever. But to be fair, this mini-series is known to be a pretty epic read considering the stakes at hand during the run. Bailey has to decide whether or not he's gonna use his powers when an evil mutant dictator threatens to take over.
Number 3. Super Dupont. Super Dupont hails from a French comic strip from the 1970s. Super Dupont was meant to be a hero built on French nationalism, but that also spoofed the ridiculousness of American superhero comics as well as American stereotypes of the French. Super Dupont's power set is like Superman's, but he's not nearly as powerful. He can fly, and he's also a master in the art of savate, a style of fighting known as French boxing. Super Dupont in the series is a mysterious figure who is said to be the son of one of the unknown soldiers buried under the Arc de Triomphe. Although how that soldier then would remain unknown, it seems kind of questionable, because if he was your father, wouldn't you know who he was? So you no longer be an unknown soldier. He fights against the Anti-France organization, which is exclusively made up of all foreigners, non-French people. These people speak a fictional language in the comics that is a mishmash of non-French languages, and it's called Anti-Francais, which I think is super ridiculous.
At number 2 we have Dog Welder. Now, aside from this guy having one of the worst superpowers of all time, I also just think he's one of the worst superheroes based on who he is as a person. If you're a dog person, skip ahead to the next section, because basically this bozo goes around and kills dogs that he finds in alleyways and then calls it a superpower to weld them to people's faces. And he's still considered a good guy. Now, I don't really understand the joke here, but if it is a joke, it's so over the top and weird that I don't even get it. I feel like DC was trying to come up with a meme character here for a laugh, but I don't like the part where he's just killing dogs, nor do I even get it at all. Dog Welder is a big thumbs down in my books, and I think he rightfully deserved a spot high on this list. Shame on you, Dog Welder.
Number 1. Six-Pack. Six-Pack is the leader of Section 8, the same team Dog Welder is on, both the first and the second Dog Welder. His powers, or abilities rather, involve him having a high tolerance for drinking, and it's been implied at one point that he may, and I'd like to emphasize the word may, have reality warping powers. But if he does, he doesn't really know how to use them. This was something that the many angled ones sensed in him when they faced off against him, and he was apparently able to create a force field, but he didn't know how he'd done it. Six-Pack is also known as Sidney Speck. He is generally known for being intoxicated, hence his name, which is in reference to drinks. And in fact, being completely sober can work against him. While sober, Six-Pack is forced to face the harsh reality of his life, which can make him question what he is doing and why. I mean, considering his power set and his general focus, that makes sense. Fair enough. Number 10. No Girl. No Girl is a creation of Grant Morrison's. Grant Morrison, when they were writing X-Men, decided to create a bunch of New Mutants, and all of them were about as weird as you'd imagine someone like Morrison would make them. No Girl, of course, is, well, no exception. Her powers are actually pretty cool, but the fact that she didn't really have a body to speak of for a good amount of the time we've known her in the comics was not really as cool. Of course, this has since been somewhat fixed, as Martha no longer uses the codename No Girl, but instead, after having been given a body by the Five, is known as Cerebella. Cerebella's powers are psionic, but considering that she no longer has her original body as it was taken from her by the U-Men when she was only a teenager, it's often been implied that she actually requires substances to her brain to stay alive. Prior to being given a body again, Cerebella as No Girl was suspended in a liquid-filled sphere or tank and lived her life that way, as a brain. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, please go check out our newest channel, Most Amazing Top 10 Anime, and give it a subscribe. Number 9. Angel. Angel might be one of the original X-Men, but that doesn't automatically mean that he is one of the all-stars or omega levels when it comes to mutants. Angel's mutant power is that he has wings, which he can use to fly. Angel also possesses hollow bones, which allow him to be light enough to soar using said wings, but also maybe make him a little bit hollow and weak in other ways. He is an extremely gifted and skilled flyer, having trained for years with how to use his wings, and he's also also an adept businessman, being Warren Worthington III in civilian life and hailing from a wealthy and respected family. However, it's still pretty easy to defeat Angel when you need to. Even recently in the comics, in X-Force issue number 30, we've seen him kidnapped and literally had one of his wings cut off as a result of people being angry and frustrated with the revelation that mutants have recently unlocked their own secret to immortality. Just goes to show you how easy it is to mess with Angel. It's kind of sadly too easy. Number 8. Brew. I honestly love Brew, and now his powers are basically the coolest around, but for a while there, he wasn't really the coolest per se. You see, Brew may be a mutant, but he's also part of the Brood, so his mutant superpower was actually nothing quite so exciting as some of the other more well-known mutants out there. Brew's mutant power and mutation actually make him compassionate, which for a member of the Brood is a super power really, as Brood don't really feel compassion, empathy, or sympathy at all like humans do. But for an X-Men, well, it's kinda less impressive. It should be noted though that even though it doesn't sound impressive, for a Brood, compassion is pretty amazing to have as an ability. And currently, Brew is also king of the Brood, so there's also that, which makes him pretty cool now, but wasn't always. Number 7. Star Fox. Star Fox's powers aren't bad in the way of them being, I would say, non-useful. They're more bad in the sense that they're considered to be, kinda shady. Star Fox is also known as Eros, originally named Aaron at birth by his parents. He had his name changed to Eros when he was still young due to his love of the ladies and his reputation for being a ladies' man. Eros in Greek mythology on Earth is known for being the god of passion and fertility, so this is pretty fitting. Star Fox is Thanos' brother, but instead of being a notorious villain like him, he would become a hero and even an Avenger. He has a lot of powers, but the one people tend to focus on when it comes to his more problematic powers is his ability to create emotional bridges and connections between people and affect one's feeling of pleasure, which has caused many to feel that Star Fox has manipulated others not just for altruistic purposes, but also for his own benefits as well. And also, you know, there's the question of consent. Pretty big question. Number 6. Red Bee. Aw, I know a lot of people love Red Bee, so I feel like this is a bit of a sad one to have on this list, but unfortunately, hey, I gotta pick some folks. Even if I myself love them as characters, you know, we gotta say some people got some bad powers. Red Bee is Richard Rayleigh, who is a hero from the World War II era in the New Earth continuity, who mainly fought his enemies with his amazing animal training skills and his bee sidekick, initially known back in his Quality Comics days as Michael the Bee, who was extremely intelligent and could also sting multiple times without perishing. No, I'm not kidding, it was a real thing. Tragically, Red Bee was of course killed off pretty early in the New Earth continuity. However, the brilliant part of this seemingly more lame character is that Red Bee is also a fan favorite and has actually been brought back a few different times in different iterations due to him having a small but pretty passionate fan base, I'd say. If you like Red Bee, let me know in the comments. I know you're out there, the Red Bee fans. Number 5. Peacemaker. Peacemaker is one of my favorite characters lately from DC, thanks to John Cena's portrayal of the character in his own self-titled miniseries, but I still acknowledge that this is one of the worst characters out there when it comes to his powers and his capabilities and just kind of a lot of stuff about him. In the comics, you might argue that Peacemaker's power actually stems from kind of his mental illness. The fact that he is extremely well trained. Before the DCEU, Gunn, and Cena made him cool, Peacemaker was Christopher Smith, a man haunted by his father's untimely end and past, who was trained to be basically a killer, believing that any force was necessary if it meant attaining some level of peace. If I had to sum up his depiction in the comics previously in one word, I would have said unhinged. I still think we'll get some of that explored more as the show progresses. We already kinda got some of it in season 1, but I do think it'll be approached from a more real and grounded place as opposed to just making Chris feel like the violent and often misguided lunatic that he seemed to be back in the New Earth continuity. Number 4. Doorman. It's time to get into some of the weirdness that is the Great Lakes Avengers. Being that this isn't the mainstay Avengers team, and I don't even think they're technically affiliated with the Avengers, like I don't think the Avengers want to be affiliated with the Great Lakes Avengers. They are about as strange and in some cases unimpressive as you could possibly expect. Doorman is one of the members of the Great Lakes Avengers. As lackluster as his name is, his power can sometimes be very useful, but the issue with it is that it's quite specific, so finding the right and best way to utilize it can be challenging. Although to his credit, I'd like to say that Doorman actually does a pretty good job with how and when he uses his powers to make himself seem pretty useful. Doorman's power allows him to create in essence a doorway or a door between adjacent areas that are separated separated, like by a wall. So he's kind of like a moving portal, which can be useful in some cases and, much less useful in other cases, depending on the scenario. Number 3, Big Bertha. Big Bertha. Oh boy. So Big Bertha can basically transform her body, adding mass, weight, and height as needed, and even controlling where the added mass goes specifically in regards to her figure and the added weight's distribution, which doesn't sound too bad on paper, right? But then the other part of this is that Big Bertha is actually Ashley Crawford, who was originally known for being a tall, thin, runway supermodel. Ashley, of course, can transform from bigger to smaller, but to do so, she has to vomit. I think you can see how this is pretty problematic and why this made the list. More recently in the comics, Marvel has kind of tried to redeem this character and her power set, but needless to say, it's likely for this very reason that we haven't really seen Big Bertha around in the comics for some time. They're trying though. Number 2, Beak. Not all mutants get to be as badass as Iceman or Cable. Case in point, Beak. Although Beak as a character is admittedly pretty cool and pretty brave, his mutant power is more a physical mutation, which means that he is evidently not considered a favorite for many X-Men fans out there. Like Skin, who was on part 1 of this list, Beak's powers, if you can call them that, leave him resembling a bird, and he's basically built like one, but initially in the comics he couldn't even really fly. Struggled a lot with that. Beak has since figured out kinda how to fly, or rather like glide somewhat, but even still he can really only go short distances and it takes a lot of work. And even going short distances, he doesn't really have a ton of like tactical flying skills to speak of either. Fortunately, Beak is still a really likable person and character, so he doesn't often need to rely on his mutant powers to be of use. Number 1, the Detachable Kid, or TDK. The Detachable Kid sounds like a pretty lame hero, and well, he is. He also isn't exactly a bona fide hero as he's a member of the Suicide Squad, but seeing as how this is a team primarily made up of, reformed criminals and villains, well, I mean villains at least who are forced into being good to get time lifted off their sentence, I think we can still count him. I think I'm gonna count him. So if you have a problem with it, we'll talk in the comments. TDK is played by Nathan Fillion in James Gunn's The Suicide Squad and was created just for the movie and the DCEU. But the character does take inspiration from someone else on part 1 of this list, Arm Fall Off Boy, and his other post-Zero Hour comic book alternate, Splitter, who's also another version of that character. At least TDK has a somewhat cooler name, but unlike Arm Fall Off Boy, his prowess is a little less admirable. When it's time for him to fight, he detaches his arms and uses them to attack. Now the other cool thing I gotta say is TDK can actually control his arms like using his mind, which is kinda cool, but that plan is still pretty terrible and he's pretty quickly defeated by being shot a whole bunch, both in his detached arms, which he seems to, still be able to feel, and directly in his body where he gets shot up a bunch, so he's instantly gone. Also, sorry, that's a spoiler, but also that movie's old now, so should have watched it. Number 10, Dazzler. I am really loath to put Dazzler on this list at all. Just feels bad. If you've been watching Top 10 Nerd for a while, then you likely know I am a big Alison Blair fan. I became one after I read through some of her original series and I fell in love with Alison, and I also fell in love with her power set. I actually really like it. However, as I've said before, having some of the worst powers doesn't mean that you're a bad character. It doesn't even mean that your powers are really all that bad. After all, it's kind of just in how you use them. But Allison, as Daz, typically prefers to use her powers to add light effects to her shows as a performer. She's been a superhero before, yes, and we've seen her do some pretty crazy things with her powers, yes, but it's not the life that she likes to live. She would actually rather downplay her abilities somewhat in terms of heroics, and then just use them to make pretty light shows in addition to her masterful singing abilities for people to enjoy, which makes them, I guess, the worst in terms of like superhero stuff.
At number 9 we have Matter Eater Lad. This guy has a pretty rough set of powers which allow him to metabolize just about anything he swallows. That's right, the enzymes in his stomach are so strong that he can break down and digest anything no matter how large, even if they're radioactive and or otherwise damaging. Now, although he is a pretty silly superhero, Matter Eater Lad isn't at the number 1 spot because I can in some sense see how this power might be of use in the right situation. For example, let's say you have to get rid of a bomb that's about to explode. The chances are that this guy will be able to eat that problem away. Or if you need to get rid of a parasite that's threatening to take over the world, he could simply gobble it up so it can't repopulate. So yes, on paper, a hero with superpowered stomach enzymes sounds like a total joke, but I would only say he's mostly a joke.
Number 8. Bouncing Boy. Bouncing Boy is a member of the Legion of Superheroes. While other names have been suggested for Charles Tane, Bouncing Boy is the one that is stuck. And when I explain his powers, you're gonna see why we went with Bouncing Boy here. Charles apparently gained his powers after drinking an experimental super plastic formula. I feel like that would kill you, really. As a result, he became extremely, well, bouncy. He can inflate into a perfectly round ball and initially would use himself as a sort of like wrecking ball, if you will, honing and mastering his ability to direct himself as he bounced around. Later on, he would also become somewhat kind of like elastic in regards to his physiology, making him more bouncy. Initially, he was someone who tried out for the Legion of Superheroes multiple times and was rejected due to his powers being even too ridiculous for the team to consider. But the Prime Earth/Rebirth version of the character has successfully become a member of that team, so yay.
At number 7 is Skin. This guy just creeps me out. I've covered him before. Mainly because of how gross his powers are, as well as his name, but also because of how depressing and off-putting he looks in every panel that he appears in. Angelo Espinosa, aka Skin, has access to about 6 feet of extra skin that he can use to stretch around his enemies or use as a rope to swing around with. He's basically like Reed Richards, except his bones and muscles don't stretch along with his skin, and also Mr. Fantastic's limit doesn't stop at 6 feet. Skin is just a very unfortunate hero who might wish that he'd never gotten superpowers to begin with.
Number 6. Peeper. Peeper is one of my favorite mutants, but sadly that does not save him like others before him, who I also love, from making this list. Sorry, Peeper. After all, this is part 3 and I already had some heroes that I loved in part 2, so what can I say? I guess I tend to love heroes whose powers actually seem less than super, so these are great lists for me. It's part of what I love about those characters, to be honest. Peeper is a mutant who honestly, all the other mutant all-stars that he's interacted with recently have been super sweet too, and I love that. I'm here for that. Peeper's powers have to do with his physical mutation, which is that he has enlarged eyes. With his eyes, he can see things that others can't, possessing different forms of sight. Currently, Peeper uses his powers to help out his fellow teammates as a member of Swords the Six, although he's not really like part of the main Six because they're teleporters. He's not a teleporter, but he works with Sword and the Six to help expand the areas of mutant technology.
At number 5 is Arm Fall Off Boy. This guy is pretty clearly a gag character, but he's technically part of the official DC universe, so he's fair game for the list. Arm Fall Off Boy, worse name, has the incredible ability to detach his limbs and use them as melee weapons. As gross and as weird as this power is, it seems like he at least believes in himself, which is something. In one panel, we see him proudly popping his left arm off with a big plorp sound, preparing onlookers to be, quote, astounded by his power. He obviously doesn't have a huge backstory, so it's hard to expound too much on him, but he definitely makes history for being one of the worst heroes, if nothing else.
Number 4. Tag. Tag is definitely one of the weirdest superheroes out there when it comes to his abilities. He is Brian Cruz, a mutant whose powers allow him to tag someone psionically, inciting a telepathic urge in other people to either run away or run toward the person he's tagged. The person who's it? He could use his powers to tag multiple people, but if making them emit a psionic signal that encouraged others to run away from them, the range would actually top out at about 100 meters away. Then the urge for people to run would stop. So it's really weirdly specific.
At number 3, we have the people of New York City. Yes. Even though it's hard to imagine calling them superheroes, at one point, the people of NYC are endowed with a very subtle power given to them by Reed Richards. And the power is to be able to tell which direction is north at all times. This is a response to the Spider Island evil plan set by Jackal, where he unleashes an army of little bugs that give people Spider-Man's powers. So to put everyone back on even keel, Richards decides that everyone should be turned into superheroes. The only thing is that to keep things simple, the ability given to the population of the city is so lame that it has gone down as one of the worst superpowers of all time, and has forced the innocent people of New York City to appear on this rather embarrassing list.
Number 2. Dog Welder 2. Dog Welder was high up on our first part to this list, but But did you know there isn't just one dog welder out there? I know, it's shocking considering that his power set in essence involves welding people to, well, I mean, you know, it's in his name. And it's pretty unspeakable if you ask me. How is this a hero at all? Never mind, how did we make a second version of him? Dog Welder 2 ends up being possessed by the welding equipment of the former dog welder and even ends up at one point welding his family. Unable to resist the compulsion to weld, he must weld. It's a curse. Despite all this, he's still considered a hero somehow. He also ends up joining along with the superhero team known as Section 8. Dog Welder 2 is even more ridiculous than the first in that he learns the true origins of his powers actually come from the Egyptian god Anubis, and also saves the world by welding 2 stars together, one of which is Sirius, also known as the Dog Star. Get it?
At number 1 is the silliest, worst superhero of all, with respect, J. Pennington Pennypacker, aka the Almighty Dollar. Living most of his life as an average citizen working as an accountant, Pennypacker eventually attends the Run-amok self-esteem camp, which turns out to be the most fateful decision he's ever made. After attending the camp for a time, we learn that it's all just a front for a mysterious scientist who's working on completing a device that could give anyone superpowers. And when J. Pennington Pennypacker is endowed with his own powers, he's given an ability that's perfectly suited for his ridiculous name. He is, from that moment onwards, endowed with the ability to shoot pennies out of his wrists at high velocities. Although he only appears in one issue of Marvel's NFL Super Pro back in 1992, the Almighty Dollar is technically an official part of the Marvel canon and must be treated as such.
Number 10. Zeitgeist. Okay, he didn't actually initially start as a villain. Instead, Axel Cluny was actually the leader of the celebrity superhero mutant group known as X-Force, but after his death and revival, he did indeed become a criminal and villain. Now, Zeitgeist has a pretty unfortunate mutant superpower that first manifested in a very unfortunate incident. Basically, Zeitgeist could spew acidic vomit from his mouth, and he wore a protective mouthpiece in and out of his costume. He discovered this power during a little makeout sesh at a beach where he accidentally vomited and melted the girl's face half off. She did survive, but the real kicker is he can't even remember her name. See, he's not really a good guy at all. It was shown that his vomit could burn through 10cm thick steel in less than 30 seconds. Again, not a horrible power, just really unfortunate. Number 9. Armless Tiger Man. Gustav Hertz worked in a mechanical laboratory in Munich, Germany during the 1940s. Now one day, his arms were caught in a machine and were amputated. Surviving the experience and given reading material on how to operate day to day using his mouth and feet, Hertz developed skill in using his teeth and his feet in place of his amputated arms. He has sharpened his teeth into fangs to use as weapons and has above average strength, allowing him to bend steel with his mouth. His toes are also very dexterous, allowing him to throw daggers with them, which is actually kind of cool in a little bit of a weird way. He was an enemy of the World War II hero Angel, which is not Warren Worthington. He was also an enemy of Wakanda, and after death, he even came into sort of indirect conflict with Hercules. That's cool. Hey guys, if you're enjoying this video and you haven't already, make sure to press that subscribe button to join us here at Top 10 Nerd. We're almost at 1.30 million subscribers, so definitely get on that. Number 8. The Living Eraser. The Living Eraser is no mere man, you earthbound fools. Sorry, I love that quote from this character, it's kind of hilarious. Kutsa here is actually a Thalumian, and he was the agent of the Supremacy, and as an agent he would use his Dimensionalizer to kidnap scientists for nefarious designs. Ooh. The Living Eraser's Dimensionalizer can transport people to other dimensions, primarily between Earth and Dimension Z. As the Dimensionalizer passes over a surface, it turns it invisible, making it appear as if the victim is being erased. When the entire surface has been transformed, the being or object is transported across dimensions to its destination. If he literally erased people, it would be way more scary, but sending them to another dimension is a fixable thing in comics, so it's not exactly the worst. Number 7. Boomerang, but from Marvel. Fred Myers was born in Australia, but moved to America when he was a small child. Now in America, his great love was baseball, and he developed an extraordinary pitching arm. He became a professional baseball player in the minor leagues after graduating high school, and a few years later entered into to the major leagues. Within a year though, he was suspended for accepting bribes. Now with an arm like that and no job, he was eventually contracted by the subversive criminal organization, the Secret Empire, and offered employment. They designed special weaponry for him to exploit his pitching ability, and he became their special operative, codenamed Boomerang. Now why Boomerang specifically and not like, I don't know, a baseball? Because he was born in Australia and that is the only projectile they have in that country, obviously. Number 6, Count Vertigo. Now you listen here, okay? Count Werner Vertigo is of royal blood. He is an heir to the throne of Latava, truly the most prestigious of titles, okay? But don't you think for 1 second that means he has cool superpowers, because he doesn't. Count Vertigo has a hereditary inner ear defect that affected his balance. That's not a superpower. Vertigo had a small electronic device implanted in his right temple though that compensated this problem. Tinkering with that device, Vertigo learned he was able to affect other people's balance as well, distorting their perceptions so that they literally could not tell up from down, which is an effect known as vertigo, and he used this skill to fight Green Arrow. He'd also use it to join up with the Suicide Squad and checkmate, using his powers to make people dizzy to his advantage. Very nice. Number 5, Codpiece. Personally, I would have loved to be a fly on the wall when the character of Codpiece was conceived. Codpiece is honestly just a guy with a massive inferiority complex. That's what it says on his wiki though. I didn't make that up. Okay? Look, in high school, a girl told him he wasn't tall enough, but he thought she meant something else, and so instead of getting like a broken muffler or giant wheels on a giant truck, Codpiece created a suit that had a Codpiece multi-weapon built into the crotch area. The Codpiece had a wide variety of functions, including a cannon, missiles, a sonic attack, 2 retractable boxing gloves, and a variety of tools such as drills and scissors. If there is one way to compensate, it is by becoming a multi-tool. Look, he's doing the best with what he's got, okay? Number 4, Polka Dot Man. While this character got a bit of a change up in the recent Suicide Squad movie, Polka Dot Man, real name Abner Krill, in the comics didn't have a power. He instead wore a suit that was covered in different colored polka dots. When these polka dots were attached to the suit, they had no function, but once they were pulled off, they would enlarge and turn into different gimmicky weapons, like flying buzzsaws, blinding sun-shaped dots, dots that turned into fist-shaped projectiles, and even one that turned into a portal. That sounds kind of cool. The dots would even self-destruct to prevent anyone from studying the tech. The only problem was that the polka dot gadgets and the electronic suit were expensive to maintain, and Krill was just literally unable to afford it sometimes. The struggle is real, man. I feel you. Number 3, Paste Pot Pete. 1963's Strange Tales number 104 states, Human Torch battles the most fantastic foe of all, Paste Pot Pete and his unbeatable super weapon. Now said unbeatable super weapon just happened to be a glue gun that fired an extremely adhesive multi-polymer liquid that he invented. Paste Pot Pete, otherwise known as Peter Petruski or even Trapster, created a not hot glue gun, and his idea was to use this to commit crimes. As you can imagine, the Human Torch really had no problems whatsoever taking down old Pete here, and he continued to do so multiple times because Pete does not know when to give up, apparently. Number 2, Kite Man. Kite Man. Hell yeah. Now riddle me this, nerds. What good are powers like reality warping, energy projection, telekinesis, and super strength against a guy who flies around on a giant kite? Yeah, I'd like to see the Justice League take on Charles Brown and his giant kite. There's no way anyone could possibly stand against that. No sir. Not at all. Kite Man possessed a variety of gimmicked kites, including a jet-powered hang glider that allowed for quick escapes, a mammoth kite that the Kite Man used to shuttle criminals out of Gotham's prison, a flashbulb kite, and a trap net kite. Although, in more recent times, he did temporarily possess the powers of Titans, those abilities pale in comparison to the might of a good kite at your side though. And in at number 1 is Ten-Eyed Man. Okay, it's a DC writer's room. You and your buds are sitting around the table. You need a villain, but someone different, someone unique, someone who could pose a threat to the Caped Crusader, a villain that requires intelligence to beat, some could say. Then all of a sudden Frank stands up. I've got it! We take away a man's ability to see, and instead his vision will come from his fingertips, 5 eyes on each hand. A brief moment of silence follows as the genius that would become Philip Reardon, the Ten-Eyed Man, has just been created. That is his only power, and as you can imagine, this does pose some problems. For starters, his regular eyes are blind. Also, he is often easily defeated simply by injuring his very sensitive eye fingers, which can be done by tricking him into catching or touching something, or even theoretically giving him a high five. But let's not forget, it has been shown he can only be kept in a jail cell by keeping his hands locked in a special non-see-through box, because with eyes on his fingers, quote, escape would be child's play for him. It's true.
Number 10, Chamber. Chamber is a weird character, but also a beloved character. Like many weirdos that I love to talk about, Chamber is also a mutant. His name is Jonathan Starsmore, and while he may actually have the potential to be considered Omega level, that doesn't make his powers any less weird. His powers relate to the fact that he is actually made out of pure psionic energy, or at least he was once his mutant powers manifested. When his powers first manifested, as a result, they blew a massive hole in his chest and his face, basically blowing off his jaw. While many people would be immensely harmed or even killed by such an occurrence, Chamber was not. Jono, as a result, no longer needed to breathe, eat, or drink, and his blood even did not need to course through his veins to keep him alive. As such, he is typically seen with a scarf or some other piece of clothing covering the lower half of his face, because you know, it's not there anymore, and he communicates telepathically, as his jaw was blown off when his powers first emerged, so you know, kinda hard to talk without a jaw.
Number 9, Flatman. Flatman, or Matt to his friends, is a mutant with the power of being flat and being able to stretch his limbs. He got his start working as a Mr. Fantastic impersonator at parties before eventually deciding to go into the hero business himself, joining the Great Lakes Avengers, assuming the false identity of Dr. Val Ventura. In addition to his stretching powers, Flatman can also make himself nearly invisible by turning to the side. Now, Mr. Fantastic's powers barely make any sense and are weird, but Flatman takes this to a whole new level. Unlike Mr. Fantastic, he must remain two-dimensional when using his powers, which brings up a lot of questions about the placement of his internal organs. But he is well versed in a made-up fighting style he calls origami fu. So make of that what you will.
Number 8, Beak. Beak is interesting in the sense that he has a physical mutation as a mutant, but one that is seemingly kinda useless. His mutation granted him wings and a beak, a bird-like appearance overall, but really these things are only an appearance alone. Beak does eventually manage to fly in the comics, but only after a long time trying to figure it out. And even then, he struggles really hard to do so, and can only fly for short distances at best. So he's no angel, if you know what I mean. Beak's real strength lies in his ability to be so likable. He makes friends easily and is usually more useful in that regard. What's even stranger though is you would think this might be challenging for someone like Beak, who, you know, looks pretty abnormal. However, this seems to have the opposite effect from what you'd expect, and instead of alienating people, Beak finds it all too easy to draw people near, relate to them, and make fast friends. But hey, he's a pretty nice guy, so I suppose when you really think about it, kinda does make sense.
Number 7, Forget-Me-Not. Not to be confused with the other Marvel character with the same superhero name who controls pheromones to make men fall in love with her, Poison Ivy style. Zabby has what could allegedly be called the power to be immediately forgotten by anyone he meets as soon as he leaves their field of vision. He was a member of the X-Men, although none of his teammates were aware of this most of the time. In fact, Professor X had to set up a psychic reminder to remind him once every hour that Forget-Me-Not existed. He had his uses and was especially good at reconnaissance missions, but once Xavier died, he became depressed and left the team. They didn't notice, despite the fact that he gave the eulogy. In the years since, he has taken up work on the mutant island nation of Krakoa as a detective, partnered with the Juggernaut. They make a good team considering that Juggernaut never remembers that he has a partner.
Number 6, Zeitgeist. Zeitgeist is known for his weird power, which when it first manifested, actually scarred the face of a young woman he happened to be making out with at the time. His power is that he is acidic vomit, which I'm not really sure how you could best utilize that, and it would definitely make for quite the hazard if you had the flu and, you know, you're feeling really nauseous. He wears a protective mouthpiece to help prevent any other dangerous cases from happening. Zeitgeist's acid vomit is powerful enough that it can actually burn through solid steel, but other than that, he is just somewhat more durable than your normal mortal human, which I guess makes sense. If you are someone who can vomit acid, you have to be fairly durable to even be able to do that and live. Axel Clooney is a mutant and used to be the leader of the X-Force at one point, but currently leads the rival team to Ecstatics known as the Excellent, which also, if you aren't reading the Excellent, you should check it out.
Number 5, Gold Balls. Can you guess what Gold Balls is able to shoot out of his body? If you guessed gold balls, congratulations! Fabio Medina discovered this really odd mutant power while falling victim to a robbery in San Diego. Armed with his gold balls and his signature catchphrase, "Gold balls," Fabio took the world by storm as the newest member of the X-Men. Now, his powers don't make sense when you think about them too hard. Where are these balls coming from? How are they being formed so quickly? You know, the kind of weird stuff that applies to a lot of superheroes. But what sends Fabio into the realm of the bizarre is the fact that it was eventually discovered that the gold balls were actually infertile eggs that he was producing and shooting at people. In light of this news, Fabio retired the name Gold Balls and started calling himself Egg.
Number 4, Stone Boy. I think it says it all when you belong to a team with the words substitute heroes in the title. Dag Wentham is known as Stone Boy, and he belongs to the team known as the Legion of Substitute Heroes. He is an alien from the planet Zwen who can transform into a stone form, becoming super strong and super durable, but also immediately it makes him unable to move, rendering him completely immobile. Yeah, so not super useful in combat if you want to like actually do anything or beat someone, but pretty useful I guess if you just want to survive? Let me put it another way. Stone Boy also has not been spotted since the New Earth continuity existed. I think that tells you just how ridiculous his abilities are. So ridiculous that we can't even seem to find a place for him in the massive universe that is the Prime Earth continuity. And this is even after he finally manages to gain some ability in a possible future to move somewhat while in his stone form, post 0 hour that is.
Number 3, 3D Man. When the Skrulls abducted test pilot Chuck Chandler, the human proved more wily to deal with than they anticipated. He tried to escape on his rocket plane, but accidentally caused an explosion that destroyed both the Skrull ship and Chuck. Bizarrely, Chuck's brother Hal witnessed the explosion, which caused Chuck to become a two-dimensional being living in Hal's glasses, imprinting an image of Chuck in each lens. If you think that doesn't make much sense, just you wait. When Hal wears the glasses and concentrates really hard, he can merge the two images of his brother, causing Chuck to emerge as the 3D Man. When freed from the glasses, 3D Man has 3 times his normal physical abilities because, you know, 3D. As an extra bonus, Hal falls into a coma every time 3D Man comes out of his glasses, only waking back up when his brother returns to the glasses. This is a confusing and convoluted gimmick that doesn't really seem worth it if all it does is free a hero who's not particularly useful. Also, the name 3D Man must be confusing for characters who don't know every detail about his life. I mean, most things are in 3D, right?
Number 2, Arm Falloff Boy. Arm Falloff Boy has to be one of the weirdest ones out there. Unlike another odd hero, Bouncing Boy, who eventually in the Prime Earth continuity achieved his dream, Arm Falloff Boy has never made the cut for the Legion of Superheroes. And that's saying something, considering that the Legion of Superheroes themselves are kind of a weird superhero team by all definitions. Arm Falloff Boy has the power to detach his limbs, which he typically then attempts to use to beat his enemies with. I mean, it's pretty cool that he can remove his limbs and survive, but it's less cool that really all he does from there is use his arm or his leg as a weapon. Especially as this means he now has less limbs to like move himself with in combat, so that's really pretty silly. And so is the onomatopoeia that is often used to describe the sound of his power. Plorp. What a great onomatopoeia.
Number 1. Fluff. First appearing in excellent number 3, Fluff probably takes the cake for having the most confusing, disgusting, and odd power I've seen in a long time. Fluff is able to generate bucket loads of belly button lint at will and vary its chemical composition. Now first off, ew. Secondly, belly button lint is just stray clothing fibers that come off of your clothes and collect in your belly button. Trust me, I know. Fluff wears a costume with a very deep V, which allows his navel to feel those sweet summer breezes, which means that he wouldn't have any belly button lint, which begs the question, what exactly is he shooting out of his little tum-tum? You're free to speculate in the comments, but I refuse to give this character one more second of thought.
Coming in at number 10 is Iska the Unbeaten. This spot could as easily been taken by Domino, as Iska also has a form of limited tychokinesis, which is probability manipulation, or also known as the power of luck, which is probably one of the most unexplainable powers because we can't even say that luck is for sure a real thing. But Iska takes it one step further into ridiculousness with the power of being literally unable to lose. Iska has the power to always win, no matter what, whether that is individual one-on-one contests, votes, or wagers, or larger battles where she is a member of a group. In contests of skill, her powers might give her the talent she needs to win, or she might just win through, quote, improbable circumstances. In larger battles or wars, her powers detect the probability of both sides winning and have literally led her to defect from the losing side and join the winning side, meaning she still personally wins. It's not that we don't understand it, it's that it can't even properly be explained without sounding utterly ridiculous. Love Iska the Unbeaten though, great character. Number 9. Rainbow Girl. She is the first superpowered individual on this list affiliated with the Legion of Superheroes, but she definitely won't be the last. The team seems to be just a sticky flytrap for all the random and wacky superheroes out there in the universe. Unlike some others though, Rainbow Girl didn't actually make it onto that team as her powers were deemed not useful enough. Instead, she made it onto the Legion of Substitute Heroes, which I'm assuming is the Legion that villains either don't listen to or the Legion that just puts on a movie for villains to watch instead of just teaching them. Fighting them. Anyways, why is Rainbow Girl useless? Well, she can harness the emotional spectrum. Red for rage, orange for green, yellow for fear, green for will, blue for hope, indigo for compassion, and violet for love. But unlike the Lanterns, she has no ring to use the power through, and she cycles through the colors impulsively, meaning it leads to terrible mood swings. Number 8. Legion. David Haller was living in Paris with his mother when her home was invaded by a assassination team. They took out David's stepfather before his eyes, which kicked off his latent psionic powers, which he used to incinerate the brains out of the assassins. However, as he did so, he made telepathic contact with each of his victims, thus experiencing their thoughts and emotions as they died, which, as you can imagine, deeply affected David, forcing him into a catatonic state. The consciousness of the leader of the assassins, Jamail Karami, was absorbed and merged into David's mind. The terrible trauma that David had suffered had splintered David's personality into multiple alters, with each of these alters controlling a different psionic power. Because of this, Legion is an Omega level mutant able to create spontaneous mutations of different kinds that are accompanied by new personas or alter egos to govern each one of these new mutations. Now, David himself stated that he had in his mind 200 Omega level split personalities, but the X-Men Rogue stated that while she was inside Legion, she was connected to thousands of types of powers, and there were more, quote, being born all the time. How this works, I have absolutely no idea, but it does, and he is scary. Number 7. Matter Eater Lad. Honestly, Tenzil Kem's power, one shared by his whole race, gives me more questions than it gives me answers. Matter Eater Lad's main shtick is that he can eat any substance of matter in any form, solid, liquid, or gas, in any amount at super speed. Bismalians, which are his race, come from a planet where over time microbes made regular food inedible. In turn, their species evolved to be able to eat any form of matter thanks to producing a variety of digestive enzymes that act on specific substances, making them easier to chew and digest. Bismalians can also metabolize food almost instantly, and if they gotta, they can consume tons of food in minutes. So where I am left confused is exactly where all that stuff goes. Not to get too into it here, but what's Tenzil's bathroom situation like? Also dental. I'm assuming their teeth are of a denser material than human teeth. One Bismalian who was part of the Yellow Lanterns ate people, which caused him to get his teeth removed as punishment, but he then had those replaced with Bismalian steel, allowing him to bite through almost anything. So my question is, could he not bite through anything before? Also, if Tenzil eats a whole asteroid, which he has done before, where does he poop? I just have so many questions and no answers. I would just one answer. Number 6, the Flash. Wally West is easily the fastest of all the speedsters out there. He has an almost spiritual connection to the Speed Force that allows him to do a great number of things, from traveling time to creating electrical energy constructs. Thanks to a heart condition, Wally has even been able to freeze time, which basically allows him to move at super speed without actually moving at super speed. And if you can explain exactly how that works to me, I will give you $1 single. That's all I got. The Speed Force is basically time, the representation of reality in motion, being the very cosmic force that pushes space and time forward. So how is it that people can hold chunks of it, or create lightning constructs with it, or absorb speed and momentum from other people or things? As a concept for time and a cosmic force, it is really hard to both wrap your head around it and explain the Speed Force and all the things that speedsters like Wally West and Barry Allen are able to do with it. You kind of just have to accept that this is what it is. Number 5, the Hulk. Everyone knows Hulk's ability to turn into a big old green monster and rip things apart with a strength that increases based on his anger. But what many of you may not know is that Hulk actually possesses a much more subtle ability to see astral projections and ghosts and even interact with them if he chooses. Hulk's astral form perception has come in handy when working with Doctor Strange as a defender. But why does Hulk have this ability? Well, Bruce Banner subconsciously feared his father's ghost would come back to haunt him, like literally come back to haunt him. And so the Hulk just developed this mechanism to allow him to look out for that ghost, and I guess other ghosts as well. There isn't really more to it. Hulk just developed the ability that is something usually reserved for telepaths. For the super intelligent Bruce Banner, it would make a bit more sense, but it's been suggested that for Bruce, the clarity of the astral forms is diminished when compared to the telepathically resistant Hulk's ability to view them. With Immortal Hulk and the connection to the One Below All, perhaps that could serve as some kind of fan explanation, but we don't have a real one, so Number 4. Jin Genie. Jin Genie was a mutant, but unlike almost any other mutant ever, her powers were directly dependent on how much alcohol she consumed. Becca Parker had the power to generate seismic vibrations proportionate to her amount of alcoholic intake. As you can imagine, being intoxicated in order to use your superpowers can be rather interesting. It seems like one of those things you should add to the list of things you shouldn't do while under the influence. Like, don't drive, don't operate heavy machinery, don't use your superpowers to cause seismic vibrations, that kind of thing. Unfortunately, we do not get to see her use her powers that much, or get an explanation for why alcohol fuels said powers, because Jin Genie is de-lifed in the same comic that she was introduced in, X-Force number 116 in July 2001. Number 3. Superman. Back in the day, while Superman was a fairly new being, he would kind of have whatever superpower he wanted / needed at the time, until eventually his set table of powers was established. But there is one new power that appeared in 1958, Superman number 125, where Superman learned to fire a tiny version of himself out of his hands. After discovering a tiny spaceship that blows up in his face, Superman loses all of his abilities minus, interestingly, his invulnerability. Luckily, he gained the ability to literally fire a doll-sized version of himself out of his hand that had all of his powers and would go and beat up criminals or melt icebergs. What's hilarious is that Superman even got jealous of the little mini-him. When a guided missile was on its way to the Eiffel Tower, he sent out his little buddy and an onlooker shouted, "How cute!" To which he said, "Cute? What nonsense!" Fortunately for Superman, his mini-me was destroyed by a kryptonite meteorite and Superman's powers were restored to him. Number 2. Color Kid. Ulu Vac from the planet Lupra is the hero known as Color Kid, and his name does indeed suit his abilities. Vac was struck by a multicolored beam of light from another dimension that granted him the incredible power to alter the color of objects and people, and that is literally all he can do. It's stated that this power is probably caused by him changing the spectrum of light around the person or thing, but there are no real explanations given. It also does absolutely nothing for him or anyone else. Color Kid decided to use this power to go and audition to be a member of the Legion of Superheroes, and what do you know, he was rejected from the team and his powers were deemed useless. While it may be true, it feels a little bit mean, but at least he got in with the Legion of Substitute Heroes, so there's that. And in at number 1 is El Guapo. Robbie Rodriguez, who goes by El Guapo, is a mutant from the Marvel Universe. But that kind of opens up a whole bunch of questions because Robbie doesn't seem to have any powers of his own, unless you consider his symbiotic relationship with his flying skateboard a superpower. His wiki page refers to this as a idiosyncratic manipulation, suggesting that Robbie actually has total control over his skateboard. But the problem with that statement is that his skateboard also acted with a mind of its own, like when it beat him up for cheating on his girlfriend. Now, an argument could be made that perhaps it's his own subconsciousness beating himself up for doing the wrong thing, but that's just a me theory, and Marvel did not state this to be true or even explain his ability at all, really. It's not telekinesis, and the board seems to have a mind of its own. I don't know, you tell me what you think.
Number 10. Luktuka the Knower. Luktuka is a strange new character who I kinda love. Their powers are very interesting and unique. Luktuka in essence knows the location of everything and anything. Being considered as an Omega level mutant, as so many are in Arako who sit on the Great Ring, Luktuka resembles a night sky, looking like a sheet covered in stars with fabric that's made up from the cosmos. So cool. Luktuka Lechtuga's powers also might not seem so great in the sense that, you know, spatial awareness, while useful, isn't exactly considered powerful even when it's on a cosmic and universal scale, possibly even multiversal. Although the amount of times I've put down my phone and not known where it is, when it's even in my hand, I feel like having someone like you could just be like, yo, where's my phone? And they could be like, oh, it's right there. That would be pretty useful. However, when combined with the powers of a teleporter, while still strange, Lechtuga's powers could be seen as exceptionally great, because then you can just like teleport anywhere. It's crazy.
Number 9. Cypher. Cypher has what some people believe to be a pretty horrible mutant ability, especially when it comes to combat. Personally, I would kill to be able to subconsciously translate any written or spoken language, human or alien. He can also subconsciously understand body language and intention, as well as decipher codes and computer languages. After he was resurrected, and also so Marvel could make him actually useful, everything he sees is interpreted into language, basically making him able to read life. Everything I just said is strange enough, but I can wrap my head around it to some degree, I guess. But don't you dare sit here and tell me that this man can speak binary code. In New Mutants Volume 3, number 14, a guy operating a mech comes upon Cypher during a battle, and Dougie Boy speaks to the mech saying, "Hello, you don't have to do this. You know, I can set you free, show you how to think for yourself." The dude operating the mech understands him, since he's speaking English, but for some reason, the mech, which isn't artificial intelligence, also understands him, boots the operator out, and begins talking in zeros and ones. What?
Number 8. Manifold. If you thought Lechtuga was an interesting character, wait till you hear about Manifold. Although with Lechtuga being newer, you may already know of Manifold, because Manifold's been around for a while. But do you know how exactly his powers work? That is what is so cool, but can also be kind of confusing. Manifold is seen as a massively powerful teleporter, but the interesting thing is he actually isn't. I mean, he is really powerful, but he's not technically a teleporter. Instead, Eden Vesey's mutant powers are based in communication, specifically communication with space. He is considered a universal shaper who can basically communicate with the universe over 616 and ask it to bend and fold for him, which is how he appears to teleport himself and others such great distances. But really, it's just talking.
Number 7. Thumbelina. Christina Anderson has an ability that quite a few characters in comic books have. That would be the ability to shrink. Thumbelina can reduce herself down to about 1/4 of an inch tall. That ability is perfectly fine in my eyes. Like I said, lots of characters can do this. My problem with Thumbelina, and also some other shrinkers, is how the heck do they retain their full-size strength when they get smaller? Or in Thumbelina's case, how the hell does she get stronger when she shrinks? I'm sorry to try and bring physics into any debate about superheroes and their various powers, but it makes absolutely no sense in the laws of physics that someone who is smaller can be more strong than they were when they were regular size. Ants, for example, if they were the size of a person, they would be insanely strong, as they are able to carry 20 times their body weight. So that's like an average person being able to carry like a small SUV or something. But since ants are so damn small, that means they can carry like a leaf or something. Thumbelina should not be able to knock someone out when she is 1/4 of an inch tall. I'm sorry, that's all I gotta say.
Number 6. Iska the Unbeaten. Iska's powers are really cool, don't get me wrong, but how does it work exactly? I feel like we still have a lot of exploring to do with this character before we can really firmly answer that question. I've been reading Iska since she came into the comics, and I'm still confused. Iska made her first appearance during the 2020 X-Men series, appearing in a tie-in issue to the X-Men crossover event 10 of Swords, which I still personally hold a great fondness for. As such, I also hold a fondness for this character, the sister-in-law to Apocalypse through his mutant wife Genesis. Iska is a mutant of the long-lost mutant island of Araco, and her powers allow her to always win, but sometimes they also force her to always win, like against her will, and then other times, betting against her even can affect the result of a contest, even if she herself isn't involved in that. How does that work? Her powers also do not just extend to physical fights, but all means of competition. So like, if you're, I don't know, doing a coin toss with Iska, she gotta win.
Number 5. Tag. Okay, I actually kinda wish I had Brian Cruz's power. It just seems like the perfect chaos creating ability. Tag's ability, known as the pariah effect, allows him to use a form of telepathy when he touches someone that causes the target to emit a psionic signal, which would make them a target for others to run away from or to run towards. Whichever way people would run, they would do it while being fully aware of what they're doing, but unable to control themselves. If they were being controlled to run away, they would continue to do so until they were about 100 feet away. But but if the signal caused them to run towards whoever it is, then they would dogpile on top of the target. What's strange is that he could also control who was affected by the ability. Like, how? He only made one person it, so how does he decide who runs away and who doesn't? He could also make whoever was it run away from themselves. So in other words, they would just run uncontrollably and in random directions, which is actually kind of hilarious. He also would always say, "You're it," which is kind of misleading because that person can't tag someone else to make them it, which is kind of unfair as well. So
Number 4, Dupe. Ranking a little lower for me because he's not necessarily a mutant maybe, is Dupe. Dupe is the creature who often is lumped in with the mutants, but maybe isn't one? We don't really know what Dupe is, never mind his power set. Dupe is basically an unstoppable force and has been implied to be a mutant, an alien, a mutant alien, or something else entirely. As of right now, his origin is classified on his own wiki with him being an artificial being, which really doesn't help to clarify anything. If he is a mutant, and I'm not saying conclusively that he is or that he isn't, as I still feel like his origin in general can be really contested at this point, his powers really are hard to classify. It's kind of like he's an old school superhero in the sense that he seems to have powers for whatever task he needs to accomplish at the time, including resurrection, the power of funk, love eyes, breaking the fourth wall, moving between panels, and even magic. Dupe has been spotted seemingly fighting alongside the mutants as recently as the AXE Judgment Day event, implying that he is at least allied with Krakoa. For those of you that don't think he's a mutant, I still kind of think he might be. Who knows?
Number 3, Hijack. The mutant known as David Bond has the oddly specific ability to control vehicular mechanisms with his thoughts. Basically, this is a form of technopathy, and he has been able to control automobiles and shield helicarriers, starting their engines, steering them, and even opening their doors. He has also been shown to be able to control high-tech suits of armor. Now, this kind of leads me to have more questions than anything else. Like, can he control motorcycles? What about bicycles? Rollerblades? Does the vehicle need to have an internal computer? What's the deal with opening and closing car doors? Does that not count as a form of telepathy? Why can he control high-tech suits of armor? What if a car has mechanical issues? Can he tell? Does the vehicle need to be in complete functioning order? Does it need to be able to turn on? I have so many questions and like no answers.
Number 2, Ice Cream. Ice Cream. Oh boy, what a wonderful weirdo this is. You know how much I have a strange affinity for mutants who have eye-based mutations and visual power sets if you're usually on this channel, and if you are usually on this channel, you should subscribe if you aren't already. But despite the I in Ice Cream's name, he is not one of those. Instead, his mutant power seems to be that he can turn himself into ice cream. Get it? Ice cream. He's only appeared once, I believe, in the comics, making a singular appearance in a strange comic in and of itself from Marvel, Obnoxio the Clown, issue number 1. In this weird single issue, Obnoxio is a clown and he's employed to act as entertainment for a surprise birthday party at the X Mansion that is being hosted for young X-member Kitty Pryde. While this is going on, Ice Cream, a villain, also appears and sneaks into the mansion, hoping to coordinate a stealthy attack on the X-Men. Instead, he ends up attempting to get Obnoxio out of the way, which he kind of succeeds in, only to later be captured in a block of ice, because he can turn into ice cream. What I want to know is, what was Ice Cream's plan of attack with his power set? Is anyone on the main team featured here lactose intolerant? Was that his plan? I have to know.
Number 1, El Guapo. Tell me that someone, thanks to genetic mutation, can fold space or speak binary code or always win, and I'll look at you sideways, but I'll nod and walk away. But you tell me that some guy named Robbie Rodriguez, thanks to a genetic mutation, has no actual powers of his own, but instead has a symbiotic relationship with a superpowered flying skateboard, which followed his mental commands and sometimes even seemed to have a personality of its own or acted on his subconscious thoughts. I'm sorry, I'm out. I'm done. Where did the skateboard come from? How did he discover this ability? When did this mutant power activate? Can he do this to other skateboards or inanimate objects in general? You can't just give someone the most unique and insane mutant ability and explain none of it.